you've got two choices in life. I always found that my success was being a people person, meaning knowing how to get around people, knowing how to get them to respect me and like me. That was really important with the older guys. And I learned something, if you don't know how to do that, then you better be very good at what you do. I was always a very good listener. My dad taught me too. He said, Michael, be a good listener. Before you speak, make sure you know what you're going to say. And that life, very, very important.
So you can tell that we're excited.
Well, always a good crowd, always.
Guys, make some noise if you're excited for Michael Franzese. You know, you have no idea when I announced that you were going to come, people were like in shock. You didn't believe it because we want to hear from you, but we were talking in the back, everybody, and you remind us when he came to an event that he had the meeting with PBD. In that event, the famous event that we have with PBD, and I just wanted to thank you for coming. By the way, before we get started, you need to know that we're a piece of honor that you're here. I know that you came specifically right after New Year's. It's not easy to come after New Year's, and you work with your family and everything, and you chose to make a decision. I'm glad that you came after our invitation. So, from Nola TPR Company, with the people to you, we wanted to say thank you for you being there. So let's get started.
Okay. How do you pray all the years you guys have been just great. From when I met Patrick David until meeting all of you, you've been great. So appreciate that.
Thank you. So, Michael, I just thought, we know you, we have read your books, and everybody, like when I announced, I told everybody, you need to read this book. I have another announcement, but I want to get into the meeting. Tell us about your upbringing first. Who were you when you were young, when you growing up with your father? Sonny, you like Franzese, have to like...
Either way, I answer the both.
Okay, so how was your upbringing? How was your life? We want to know how can you get into your life? You were a kid?
Well, my dad was a very high-profile figure in that life. He was the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York Cosa Nostra families. And my dad was very, very high profile. It's kind of like the John Gotti of his day. Always under investigation, major target of law enforcement. So I grew up in that from the time I was, 2, 3 years old, and I remember. And, originally my dad didn't want this life for me. He wanted me to go to school, be a doctor. And I was on that road. And my dad, during that time, as I was growing up, he was indicted several times. Twice in grand larceny, once for murder. So he was in and out of prison, going to a trial, and I was going through all of that. But still, my dad kept me on track, and I was going to school. And then he got indicted in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. He went to trial, got convicted, and got a 50-year prison sentence. I was 16 when that happened, 15, 16. And he was out on appeal for 3 years. Then he lost all his appeals, and when I was 19, he went off to prison for that 50-year sentence. And he was 50 when he went in, so I figured at 50 on top of that, I thought my dad would never come out of prison alive. At the same time, Joe Colombo, who was the boss of our family, I knew him, most of my life. He kind of took me under his wing. He was kind of a mentor for me. I started meeting a lot of my dad's friends, and they would say, Mike, why are you going to school if you don't help your father out? He's going to die in prison. I was very affected by that. I love my dad. And I can tell you this, Bill, I went to jail, to prison for a crime that I was guilty of. I pled guilty, I did my time. My dad did a lot of bad things in that life, obviously, but that conviction that he got for bank robbery, my dad was innocent. There was no bank robbery, he was framed. I'll take that to my grave. I investigated that case thoroughly, and he was framed. And I just thought that, I needed to help him get out of prison. So I was with my dad in a penitentiary in Leavenworth. We were in the visiting room. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die here. And we argued a little bit, and finally, I was kind of a headstrong kid. My mind was made up. He said, okay, son, but if you're going to be on the street, I want you on the street the right way. In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So It was at that time that he proposed me for membership into the Colombo family. I was 20 years old, and that's how it started for me.
And when you were, let's just say Kona, because he was in that light when you were probably 8, 9, 10 years old, 5.
Yeah.
Did you know that he was doing that? Did you know, were you questioning? Did you ever dream about when you were 10-year-old, you see your dad doing that? I brought my kids, right? And I tell my kids, well, you're going to be an insurance agent, right? And they said, some of them, one of them, they say, yes, daddy, I want to work with you. The other one wants to be a police. Another one wants to be a firefighter. But one of them says yes. So when you saw him when you were 8 and you wanted to be like him, what was your relationship with him about that?
You know, I wanted to be like him because I really loved my dad. I loved the way he carried himself. He was a great father, good husband to my mother. And unfortunately, because I saw him in trouble all the time, I always looked at law enforcement as the enemy. I hated development. I hated police. And my dad didn't teach me to hate them. It was just because of what I witnessed, you know. And they were always around us, always kind of harassing the family, at least in my view. So my dad was my hero. He was my idol. But I didn't want to be part of his life. I just wanted to be like him because I respected him in that regard. But he kept keeping me on the straight and narrow. He said, no, you got to go to school. I want you to be a doctor. You're going to be the first professional in the family. So he really tried to spin me in that direction.
Sense. Makes sense. And so now you became how were you when you became a male? How?
It was funny because I actually I don't know if the right word is celebrate, but it was 50 years ago this past Halloween that I took an oath and became a made man. So it was the 50th anniversary of that. It was Halloween night in 1975. I was 24 years old. I was one of the younger guys. And, you know, it was a meaningful year because everybody I knew in that life, everybody that I met, was either dead or in prison for the rest of their lives. And here I am 50 years later, and I'm still here, and I'm alive, and I'm free, and I have a family, and it's just very blessed. We're blessed. But
you know, you're an example for all of us. We know when Haas introduces the redemption story. Because we need that. But, okay, so now you're 24. You're a main man. You're surrounded by people who are older than you, people that have more experience than you, people that want to take you. Maybe there is some envy over there. How do you handle that, being that young? You know, because we have a lot of young people over here. I was actually 24 when I became a marketing director or a main man, right?
taking oath?
Basically, and we came into an industry when an industry is surrounded by older people. People in the insurance business is people with more experience and didn't have that experience. So how did you handle that yourself when you were 24?
You know, that's a very good question because in that life, you know, the consequences could be very severe if you don't know how to navigate the life and handle yourself. And I was really one of the younger guys. And when I got straightened out is the term, when I got made at 75, they had an expression that the books were closed. They weren't bringing any guys in for almost 20 some odd years. And so there were guys waiting 20 years to become a made guy. And they were a lot older than me. So I come in and there was a lot of resentment, even though I was my father's son and, you know, he was well respected. But there was a lot of resentment because of my age or because I got in there, you know, fairly quick. Even though I spent 3.5 years as a recruit where I had to prove myself, and everybody has to prove themselves. And so I learned early on how to navigate that, you know. And I really realized in life that, you know, you've got two choices in life. I always found that my success was being a people person, meaning knowing how to get around people, knowing how to get them to respect me and like me. That was really important with the older guys. And I learned something, you know, if you don't know how to do that, then you better be very good at what you do. What I mean by that, let's say you have a doctor that's got a bad bedside manner, but he's the greatest doctor. Well, you'll forget about his bedside manner because he's going to cure you, right? But if he doesn't have that expertise, if you don't have that expertise in what you're doing, you better know how to deal with people. Very, very important. And in that life, it was extremely important because when people resent you, it gets dangerous. So I learned early on, how to get around people, even though when I became a captain, they appointed me a captain again at a young age, and everybody in my crew was older than me. So even though I had a higher rank than them, I gave them a lot of respect because of their age. And they saw that in me, and they respected that. And that's how I gained a lot of respect for people. And, and that's true in the real life, too, You just got to know how to deal with people. You got to be a people person. My dad taught me a lot of things. But he said to me once, and I'll never forget, he said, "You know what, son?" He said, "Always remember this. Be kind and respectful to the little people." And when he said little people, he didn't mean that in the meaning way. It was just the way he spoke. He said, the valet park, take good care of it. The person that takes your coat, the waiter that comes to your table, always treat them kindly because they're the people that make you strong. It's not the ones on top because they're looking to cut your legs off. It's always the people around you. And I found out that to be so true, and it's just been a practice in my life. And, it's worked well for me. And I encourage people all the time. I'm in business now with a young man in the wine business. And I love wine. I'm Italian. My grandfather was making wine for us when I was 10 years old in his basement in Brooklyn. We're Italians, we drink wine. But I was entering the business. And he came to me with a wine from Armenia. And I said, I don't know if I want to get involved, but he impressed me so much at a young age. And I said to him, Sam, I said, you're the product. You're the reason I'm getting involved in this. And I said, let's hope that I'm right. I said, I did my research, obviously, tasted wine, the price, all of that. But I said, I'm venturing into this because you're the product. I said, don't disappoint me. And he's been a great partner and a great worker. So, you always got to make you understand, you're the product. People are looking at you first, And somebody said, well, Michael, what if they really like what you have, but they don't like you? I said, well, then they'll look to steal it from you and get rid of you. So what good is that, right? No, you want to be a person that they want to be around. And that's worked for me throughout my life. And I encourage the younger people that I counsel really to be that person.
I love it. Oh, wait. Lacy, yours, that was good. Is the wine from Armenia? Is the wine made in Armenia?
Wine is from, the world's oldest vineyards. And the story is, and I checked this out as best we could historically, is that when Noah's Ark landed and the flood subsided, it landed at the foot of Mount Ararat. And the new civilization, the new vineyards were first planted there. So it's the earliest known wine that we have. They also say it might have come from Georgia, but they're kind of neck and neck, Georgia and Armenia. And when they came to me to brand it, they said, Michael, we want you to brand this wine because your story is a story of transformation. And wine is really a transforming product. So, it all made sense to me. And we're a third year in business and we're profitable in our third year, which is good.
I'm asking you because we have some Armenians over here that we have some.
I love the RPAs. They're very family oriented. They're good people.
I love it. Okay. So we're learning, right?
Patrick is quarter.
Yes. Half Armenian. And okay, so we need to try the wine. We need to try. So now I want to get into the growth as well. So I want to learn about it. I wanted to learn how do you navigate those times when you were that young. But to your books, you talk about consigliere, right? Consigliere, which is a counsel that you were receiving, right?
Yes.
So how was that process? In our business, we also have some counsel, right? Sometimes we counsel, and sometimes we receive counsel. So how was that relationship with you in your life?
Well, again, it's a difficult life to navigate because, unlike in the real world, you make a mistake in that life and the consequences could be very severe. And so you really got to be very, very careful. I've learned something, even at my age now, you're never too old to learn something from someone. And I was always a very good listener. My dad taught me too. He said, Michael, be a good listener. You know, before you speak, make sure you know what you're going to say. And that life, very, very important. You know, I realize this, the art of negotiation is so important, and especially in that bike, because you're negotiating sometimes for somebody's life, negotiating a very serious business situation. So you got to know how to, hold your ground and negotiate. And that life was all about negotiation all the time, especially when I became a capo regime, a captain, and I had my crew under me. They're always getting in trouble, always something going on. And you're always negotiating, whether it be a business deal or, something even more, significant. So you learn, and again, learn to be a good listener. There's sometimes you could be the smartest person in the room, or you don't want anybody to know that. So what do? Keep quiet, let them talk, hear everything you got to hear, and then you know how to respond. There's other times when you're not the smartest person in the room. And you don't want anybody to know that either. So you just keep quiet. Let them talk, encourage them, fall apart. By the end of the conversation, you'll know exactly what you need to know if you know to contribute. So, and these things, I'll be honest with you, a lot of them I learned on the street, It's one thing to have an education, but it's another thing to have a street education. Because, a lot of things I see, there's a lot of myths out there, especially in the media and entertainment about the mob. There's some very, very intelligent guys. Yeah. Very crafty, intelligent guys. You really had to know what you were doing to deal with them. So I learned.
How was that? When you said it was some mediation, I know that you talk about also about the sit down, right? You have to sit down with somebody. Some people is afraid to have that sit down. Some people is sometimes afraid to when there is an issue in business, or there is an issue in somebody in your world, right? Somebody's about to die, right? But in our business, it's like somebody maybe did a bad transaction with somebody, the numbers are bad. And we need to sit down with that person and have a conversation about, hey, what's up? Why your numbers are bad? So how did you do that conversation without killing, I don't know the word is killing, but without the other person feel threat or also protecting the life of the other person? How did you do that?
Well, let me tell you, in a sit-down among made guys that were official guys like myself, there were certain rules of the sit-down. You can never be disrespectful. If I was sitting down with you, we were both made guys, and you're lying for your teeth, and I know you're lying, and I call you a liar, I lose the sit-down. You lie, I lose, because I disrespected you.
Even though I was the one lying?
Even though I knew you were lying, yeah. And when you sat down with the old-timers, they would try to put you in a position where you would make a mistake and lose the argument just because of what you said. So you had to be very careful. You had to weigh your words properly. You had to, if the boss was, over the sit-down, you had to make him understand what was going on without calling that other person out. So it was a strategy you had to learn how to employ. And in a way, it's a good thing because, I see meetings now in the real world get out of hand. People get upset. They start calling names. They make it personal. You don't accomplish anything that way. The best mediation or the best negotiation is when both sides walk out of there, they're okay. So I had to learn that. I sat down with John Gotti a couple of times. And, John was a smart guy. And he was, how could I do it nicely? He had a very big ego. So he would never go out of the room thinking that he lost. So you had to make him think he won, but still got what you wanted out of it. So it wasn't a question of, who the hero was. Did you get what you want? Let him think what he wants. And there was a lot of guys like that. So you had to be very careful in how you sat down and negotiate. And I learned that, One thing I have to say, I was fortunate. I don't take credit for it, but my dad schooled me well. But my dad was very bright. He was one of the smarter guys in my life. And he schooled me well, and I paid attention to him. And if I try to tell this to my own, boys, I said, listen, Dad's got a lot of experience. Pay attention. Because sometimes, you younger people, they think they know it. But you could always learn. And, I have to say that the reason for a lot of my success is because I learned from other people, and I paid attention.
I can tell that, by the way. I can tell you're a lot, sir. You've been watching everything. How in order to do that, you need to be good in human nature, right? You need to be good at reading people. You need to know who is that person an enemy? Is that person an ally? Is that person a friend? Yes. What did you do to, I don't know, to be that good at that? What did you signal the person for us to be able to learn that? You know, hey, that person doesn't have your back. That person is flattery. That person is trying to buy you. You know, what signs do you see?
Well, you know, I learned not to put too much trust in anyone, and not because they might have been a mistrustful person, but because everybody has their limit. You know, you try to analyze a person, say, does this person have a limit? And maybe, like I had a partner, and he and I were in the gas business, and we got along very well. We were partners for 7 years. He was a very bright guy. What I knew, and obviously we were committing crimes. We were defrauding the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline, and he and I devised this scheme together. But I knew if push came to shove, he wouldn't stand up. I just knew he would. So I tried my best not to put myself in a situation with him that I couldn't overcome if need be. And in the end, when I went down, he was the main witness against me. He did cooperate with us. But I knew that. I was prepared for it. So, and again, when I say people don't always betray you because they want to betray you, they just don't have the capacity to not betray, if you understand what I mean. And that's trying to understand human nature. And there's like my father. My father would take a bullet. He would do whatever you want to do to him. He's not going to betray. I knew that, you know, in a way. Even I was told that my father betrayed me, because, you know, I have to say this. One of the horrors of that life is that you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room, and you don't walk out of it. And that is a tough part of that life. And obviously through my 20 plus years, I've seen that. I've witnessed that happen. And I was put in a situation one night where I was walked into a room. And if I could tell you the story, because it was a defining moment in my life. You know, people, we have moments in our lives, when you think about it, that are defining moments. They can actually change the course of your life or have such an impact on you that it really matters in your life. And this was a defining moment because my dad and I were both captives at that point. We had the same rank. And he called me one day. He said, I got to see you. My dad was on parole. By the way, he did 40 years on that 50. 40 years. He was out on parole, and he said, I have to see you. And I went to see him, and he said, look, the boss wants to see us tonight. I said, okay, Dad, what time you want me to pick you up? Because I would drive him everywhere. He said, well, they want to do this differently. I said, what do you mean? He said, they want me to come in first, and they want you to come in second. I said, well, why would they do that? I said, why are they going to separate us? And, you know, there had been some talk on the street. There was an article in the Long Island Press that said that I was becoming powerful enough to break away from the Colombo family and start my own family. No truth to it. There was a fantasy article. Some reporter just made it up. But that gets into the head of some people, you know? And in that life, you're always worried about, you know, he's going to overtake you or whatever. So I said, Dad, well, why are you going to let them separate us? And he said, you know, there's talk on the street. We're not going to do that. We're going to go together. He said, no, we got an order. We got to do it that way. And it was the first time that I really had an argument with my dad. I was dead set against it. I said, no, we're not going to do that. After about a half an hour of arguing in his driveway, I threw up my hands. I said, you know what, Dad, I've been listening to you all my life. I don't like this, but if this is what you want to do, fine. So I get a call from another fella, Jimmy, guy I knew my whole life, and he said, meet me in Brooklyn on such and such a place. The boss was also on parole, so this was a covert meeting. We had to make sure that nobody followed us because he would get violated. So I go meet Jimmy. I was living in Long Island. I meet him in Brooklyn. I park my car, and I get in the car with him, and there's some guy sitting in the back seat. And I didn't really recognize him, and he wasn't a made guy, so I'm saying, why is this guy sitting in the back? You know, why is he coming to an official meeting like this? And we're driving. It was a house in Brooklyn that we were going to, so we had to make sure that nobody was following us. We're driving around, and I'm waiting for Jimmy, my dear friend, to tell me what this meeting was about. He doesn't say anything. We just talk small talk. And I didn't want to show that I was concerned, so I didn't really question him. And then we get to the house, and, you know, I got to tell you, there was an August night. It was about a 30-yard walk from the car to the basement apartment where we were going. And I was getting scared, honestly. I said, you know, this is a bad sale. I get out of the car, and I hear Jimmy's car door slam, close, and then the kid in the back, his door closes. And I'm saying, why is this guy coming? Now I'm getting really nervous. And as I'm walking down this path, I'm getting scared. And I'm saying, this is bad. Something's going down here tonight. And, you know, people have said to me, Michael, why didn't you cut and run? And I said, you know what? It wasn't heroic. It was just robotic. I was just such a heart of that life. I said, hey, if this is it, you know? But I was scared. Don't get me wrong. I was scared. I don't mind saying it. And, you know, when I talk about this is the truth. You know what I learned? When you think you're going to die, your senses get, I mean, I can smell the fragrance of the flowers, and I can see the little fireflies going around. Fireflies, it was a summer day. And when we go down the stairway, and when that door opens, I don't know how I didn't just faint, honestly, because I know the setup. And obviously I'm here, so everything worked out. But they started grilling me. I'm sitting down with the boss, and they're grilling me about, you know, the gas business. And the article said we were making $2 billion and all this kind of stuff. And I was starting to get angry. I said, you know, I'm handing you guys all this money. I said, I'm taking all the risk. I said, when they write about you, it's a lie. When they write about me, it's the truth. I said, what is this going on? I was starting to get angry. But then I realized you never outshine the master. Never, right? That's the boss, right? So I kind of calmed myself down. And then everything is okay. Okay, great. You know, let's have a drink of wine. Everybody's hugging everything. I was so angry. I said, okay, great, thank you. I said, look, I got a long drive home. I'm going to leave now. So I said, Jimmy, take her to my car. So we get the car, and I was so mad at him because I know him my whole life, and he didn't prepare me, so I look at him. I was really ready to just blast him verbally, right? And he says, wait, stop, before you say anything. I said, what? He's, Mike, I got to tell you something. He said, you held yourself up pretty good. It was serious tonight. And I got even more mad. I said, you knew that? You're my dear friend. You knew that, and you don't say anything to me? But he was a smart guy. He looked at me, and he said, well, let me ask you this. If it was the other way around, would you have told me? And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, no. He said, Mike, this is the life we lead. He said, you know it as well or better than you grew up in it. And I was just thought about that for a minute. And then we get near my car, and I go to get out, and he grabs my arm just like this, and he says, Mike, I want to tell you something. He said, you could take this to the bank. I said, what? He said, your father was in there before you tonight. He didn't help you one bit. Said he threw you under the bus. I was so stunned, honestly, that I didn't even know how to respond to him. And so I get out of the car, and I'm walking to my car, and I'm saying, what could he have done? But knowing my father so well, I know exactly what he did. He said, hey, if my son is doing anything wrong, he does everything, I'm on parole, I don't do anything, you know, I can't handle anything. So instead of standing up for me, he just put me out on my own, which was tough. You know, and I got to be honest with you, I never mentioned it to him, because in that life, you don't talk out of turn. I never said a word to my dad until later on, but I really believe that night I said, man, this life can separate father and son. What do we really have here? And it wasn't until 2 years later that I made a decision to walk away, but I really believe if that incident didn't happen, I probably would not have walked away from a while. So that was a really defining moment for me, even though it took a while later. I don't want to leave the law of first. I still love like that, you know. I really did. I did not expect that from him, but I loved him. But I knew my dad would never want to hurt me. But it was hurtful the way it had.
That was fun. How do you now? At that time, you're making a lot of money. I don't know if you want to give the numbers, but you're making a lot of money. Now you're making money. You're young, right? I believe that you're still in your 20s, early 30s, and you're making a ton of money. How could you handle that success? Because you're having a lot of success, a lot of guys. I believe that I have a 30-year-old guy. You're going to tell us the number, but I have a 30-year-old guy making millions of dollars a week right? Maybe that person will go crazy about it. They will go out of control. How do you handle the money? How do you maintain control? How was that for you?
Well, I was so into business that the money was kind of a byproduct. I'll be honest. I bought a jet plane. I had a helicopter. I had, a house in Florida, a house in New York, a house in California. But I also had legitimate business at the time. So I was able to show this. I had 2 car agencies. I had a production company in California. So, I had good income. But to me, it was more about just business. Just keep going. I have to say this is pretty dumb, but somebody said to me, Michael, you got all the money you need, why don't you just stop? I said, you know what? You get as much time for $1 million as you do for $1 billion, so I may as well keep going. But that was my attitude back then. I was very aggressive. And so I just worked and worked and worked. And
How much money were you making?
we were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, and we were taking down between 30 and 40 cents a gallon. So it was several $1 million a week that we would bring it in. So it was a lot of money. And when you're bringing in money that way, it was kind of a task. Where are you going to put it? How are you going to hide it? How are you going to show it? So we had a pretty. I'm not going to educate everybody.
I don't have that problem. Okay?
We had to have a fairly sophisticated operation just to put the money in different places.
Love it. I want to transition. One more thing too. I want to transition a little bit about the family. Because you're having a family, and you're having that life. How was your life? And at that time, because their life must have been chaotic, right, with the family and the business and the Colombo family, and you have kids. How was that with the family?
Well, I never like to use the word failure because to me, if something doesn't work out, it's always a learning experience, and you move forward from that. You learn from it, and you do better the next time. But I have to say, one of the failures in my life, I was married at a young age, and we had 3 children in 3 years. And I believe she was a good woman. I have nothing to say. Unfortunately for her, she was married to me at the time. I don't think I was ready for it. And I treated her well, don't get me wrong, gave my kids and her everything, but I didn't give them my time. And, we were married for a couple of years and then divorced later on. But it was wrong, and one of the things that I counsel a lot of guys on, guys come to me very successful, and they're having trouble in their family life. And I say, well, that's not success. I know you give your family everything, you don't worry about money and they're well taken care of, but they don't have you. And that was my failure at that time. I didn't give my wife and children my time. And that marriage failed. And obviously now we're married 40 some odd years. So, I learned my lesson, but it was wrong at the time to devote all my energy to my work and my business. And when you're on the street like that and you're a captain in the family, you constantly you got that business to worry about, and then you got your legitimate business, so you get just so caught up in it. And, you disregard your family to a degree. When that life too, part of that life is the nightlife. I was out every night, 6 nights a week. I'd go home for dinner, and then it's 9, 10 o'clock, I'd get picked up. We'd be out till 2, 3 in the morning. So it was not good in that regard. But I handled my business okay, but I didn't handle my family the way it should.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. In the book, I wanted to transition now to the redemption and transformation story now. In the book, you talk about everybody who was in the mob when they used to go to jail. They were required to read the praise, right? And you chose to read another, right, from the Bible. And how was that for you to start reading Proverbs, and what was the difference?
Well, when I pled guilty to racketeering, the underlying act was tax fraud. I got a 10-year prison sentence. I had a $15 million restitution and $5 million forfeitures. And I went off to do my time, and I did 5 years. I came out on parole, and through a course of events, I violated my parole. The government was trying to get me to be a cooperating witness. And the fact that I had walked away from that life, everybody was upset with me. My father practically disowned me, boss contract on my life. I had a lot of trouble because you can't walk away from that life. It became very public when I walked away. And so I'm out on parole, and it was a very difficult time. You know, in New York, how can I say it? I moved out to California. My wife was from California. And I was like a fish out of water when I was on parole. And, you know, I was trying to get my life back together, and people were upset with me. I basically dodging bullets. And I violated my parole because the government really was trying to get me to cooperate, and I wouldn't do it to the extent that they wanted me. So I sat with them. I said, look, I'll tell you what I did, but I have not put people in prison. It's not what I do. And so they violated me, and they said to me, I was walking out of a bank in Southern California, and 15 agents picked me up, threw me in a paddy wagon, went to my house, cleaned my house, found a search warrant, took my wife's money, everything we had. We had 2 little babies at the time. And when I was in, they threw me in a hole, and they said, you'll never see the light of day again. We're indicting you on another case. We violated your parole. And it was really the worst night of my life, because I said, you know what? I was always a guy that thought I can handle everything. I'll take care of it. That night I was out of answers. Just had no clue what I was going to do. And I said, I think they got me this time. Remember, I'd been indicted 7 times. I went to trial 5 times. I did all those cases. So I was really at a loss. I said, I think it's really over for me. And I'm only in my 30s. And I'm laying on a cot. And I got to tell you, you know, I have felt every emotion in life that you could feel, from ecstasy right down to grief and everything in between. But I've really learned that hopelessness is really the worst emotion that you can experience. When you think it's over, there's nothing you can do. And so I'm laying there, and, you know, I'm saying to myself, man, you know what? I visited my father for 20 years. They're going to keep me in this solitary. They can't put me out on the yard. Everybody's looking to hurt me. I wanted to just close my eyes and not wake up. I really felt that way. You ever get to a point, I hope not, where it's too painful to think of your future? I got a young wife. We got 2 little babies. So I got to have her visiting me. I'm going to probably lose her anyway. It was just a bad night. And I'm laying there, and a prison guard walked by my cell, and he sticks a Bible through there. Wow. And I pick up the Bible, I look at it, and I just threw it against the cinder block. I don't need this. And it took me, you know, maybe another minute. I said, you know what? It's only me and God in the cell. I don't need another enemy. I got nothing but enemies. And I picked up the book, and it was the first time, you know, I grew up Catholic, but Catholicism to me was like a subject in school. I wasn't a practicing Catholic. I believe in God, but that was about it. And I just looked up at that that cement ceiling, and I said, you know, if you're really up there, you need to help me. I can't deal with this tonight. And the book just falls open to the book of Proverbs. And I'll make a long story short. You know, I started reading that book, and I came to 2 verses that really had an impact on me. And it kept me in solitary for almost 3 years. And the case that they tried to bring against me fell apart. So they gave me 4 years on the violation, and I did the 4 years, and I spent almost 3 years in the hole. And it was during that time that I really said, you know what? If there really is a heaven and hell, and there really is a God, and there really is a Jesus, I want to investigate. And, you know, I had my wife send me in books on every faith, and I just did my research, and I read, and I just came out of there a true believer. And it really had an impact on my life. I want to tell you how significant that is. Because remember, being in jail like that, I don't care, you're a failure. You go to prison, you know, you messed up. You're it. And I messed up. And I want to tell you how significant that's been in my life. In 1986, well, in 1975, when I took that oath, there was 6 of us that night. I'm the only one alive. The other 5, none of them died of natural causes. They were all murdered. 1986, Fortune magazine writes, 50 biggest and most powerful mob bosses. Huge article. They featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6, and I was the youngest guy on the list out of the 50. Today, someone 30-odd years later, 48 of them are dead. Well, number 49 is doing life in prison. I'm the only one alive and free. So what does this tell you? It tells me very definitively that God had a different plan and a purpose in my life. I never... And I will tell you this, I came out, I never planned to be a speaker. I had no clue what I was going to do in my life. I never planned to write books. I never planned any of that. It was kind of one step at a time, and things started working. I said, God, I guess this is what you want from me because it seems to be working. And that was in 1996 when this all started for me. And we had some ups and downs, some challenges during that time. But I mean, I consider myself to be very, very blessed and very fortunate to be alive and free, have a family, be able to function. I'll be 75 years old this month, this year. And, the lesson here is, look, I can tell you this, people. I really respect confidence in people. I really do. I love seeing it. I don't like arrogance. I think one of the greatest qualities in people of success is humility. And humility is not weakness. Some people think, if you're humble, you're weak. It's not weakness at all. It's just knowing how to carry yourself and realizing, look, I've seen the most powerful guys in that life, and I can mention names, who could order life and death, and it happens. And I see them die wearing somebody else's underwear in a prison cell. When we think that we're above and beyond anything that happened in life, we're only kidding ourselves, because life can change in a second. But we're just blessed and need to be thankful that we have the light, we can function, I tell my kids, I have 7 kids, 7 grandchildren now. I tell my kids, hey, when they complain and say, you know what? There's kids in Africa and different parts of this world, okay, that have to walk 2 miles to get water. And all those kids think to deserve that was be born. So what are you complaining about? You got a roof over your head, you got food on the table, you got an opportunity to work or go to school or learn. Stop complaining. And when you realize that, we had it so much better than so many people throughout this world. I mean, I'm just reading about what happened today with Maduro. It's so many people in the street. I was reading one poor guy who doesn't know, where he's going to get his next loaf of bread because the stores are closing down. And we never had an experience, at least I did. Yeah, I went to prison, but I deserved to go. I was a criminal. So I can't complain about that either. So I don't know. I think when you go through times like that, you really, you get grounded in life. You understand how fortunate, how blessed you are.
How's life now? How's your life now? How's your life now after the transformations, your family, with the Lord, with life with the Lord? How's the life now? Compared to the past? How's your life?
Well, I mean, there is no comparison. Listen, I have to say something for all you ladies out there. I met this young girl. I met my wife. She was on a movie set. I was producing a movie. She was a dancer in the film. She was 19 years old. And I immediately fell in love with her just looking at her. But she was a young Christian girl. And I really walked away from the life because of her first. Because, one thing I have to say about that life, and I never knocked my former associates. I was one of them. I just happened to be very blessed. There were some good guys in that life. There's an age-old question, why do good people do bad things? Well, sometimes you're misdirected, you're misled. You don't know. It doesn't make you a bad person because you do a bad thing sometimes. I'd really learned that. It's really what a person's heart is all about, what their intentions are. And so, but I will say this, it's an evil life, a mob life, the gang life. They're evil likes. And why do I say that? Because I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been totally devastated, including my own. And not my wife, because I've been able to spare them, but my mother, 33, when she died in 2012, she was 33 years without her husband. And at the end of her relationship with my dad, I can only call it ugly. because she blamed him for everything that went wrong, rightfully so. What went wrong? My baby sister dies of an overdose of drugs at 27. She couldn't handle all the tournaments. My brother, younger brother, drug addict for 25 years of his life. I can't even tell you what I had to do just to keep him alive on the street. There was always something going on. My other baby sister, she dies at the age of 40. Our whole family destroyed. In every family of every member, similar circumstances. So any lifestyle that does that to a family is a bad life. It's what I tell these gangbangers when I talk to them. You're selfish. You're bringing a lot of hurt on your family. You're a selfish person. Get rid of this. That's the only way you can appeal to these guys, because sometimes they don't understand. But so I said, I'm not going to do this to this young girl. I met her. I fell in love with her. I'm a major target. It's only a matter of time before I either get killed or I go to jail. We had 3 wars in our family. A lot of guys got killed during that time. I said, I'm going to meet the same fate. I'm not above that. Why would I do that to her? So I really walked away because of her. And I have to tell you, if I don't meet my wife, if she's not my anchor in life, and I really mean that. That girl, she went through 8 years of me being in prison. She held up. She had her rough points, but she supported me even when things were tough. I was so blessed to meet her. And if it wasn't for her, I'd either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. So behind every good man, there is a better woman. I can...
What do we... All right. So, okay, now, advices. Like, we're here, right? We wanted to come here. I have no idea how excited we were for you to be here with us. What advice can you give us right now? We have a lot of, like, a nasal noise if you are under the age of 30. Yeah, I'm 41, okay? But we have a lot, very young, okay? We have a lot of young people over here. What advice could you give them? Hey, you've been going through, you're going to be 75 this year. You have the life, you have the transformation, you made a lot of money. What advice can you throw?
Well, I want to tell you this. What I first said, always remember this. You know, you want to succeed in business and in life, you're the product. Let people like you. Let people enjoy being around you. You don't carry yourself right. Well, remember this. This is very, very important. Always take responsibility for anything that goes wrong in your life, even when it's not your fault. It's very easy. Hey, this guy screwed me and I failed because of him. You know what happens when that happens to me? Why didn't I see that? Why didn't I know that in advance? Why did I allow that to happen? When you take responsibility for anything that goes wrong, it makes you stronger, it makes you smarter, it makes you realize, I can't do this again. You know, don't make excuses in life. Excuses make you feel better for a minute, but they don't solve the problem. You know? And for me, I never try to assess blame. I try to look for solutions. Don't assess blame, because there again, okay, it's his fault, it's not mine, so I just continue doing what I'm doing. I didn't make that mistake. That person screwed me. No. You made a mistake. You didn't realize. You didn't watch it. You didn't anticipate what was going to happen. When you always take responsibility, no matter what, it makes you a better person, makes you smarter, and it's just a good way to go in life. And I've learned that. And I don't like when people don't ever feel sorry for yourself. My Uncle Joe, Virgin Marine, right? Tough guy, hard drinker. You know, one day I'm 10 years old. My mother was very tough on me. Very tough, right? I was the oldest. And so she was yelling at me for something. She smacked me, I don't remember. So I'm 10 years old. I go into the living room. My Uncle Joe happened to be there. So he sees me, maybe a tear in my eye. He looks at me, he says, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Uncle Joe, my mother again, you know." He said, "Let me ask you something." I said, "What?" He said, "You got a dictionary in this house?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Go get it." I go upstairs, I get the dictionary. He said, "Open it up. You know the word S?" I said, "Yeah." The letter S? "Yeah." He said, "Get her to the letter S." I do that. He says, "Look at the word sympathy." I look at it. He says, "There it is." He says, "You're looking at it?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't ever look for it again."
Wow.
I never forgot that. He said, because it makes you weak. He said, sympathy doesn't do anything for you. It makes you weak. Makes you feel good for the moment. And you know, The only time I did, for a moment, I felt sorry for myself was when I was in that hole that night. And then I snapped out of it because, the CO handed me that Bible. But it's another good thing, sympathy doesn't do you any good. It doesn't solve the problem. I always want to know, what's the solution? How are we going to get past this? How are we going to fix it? And I think if you have that attitude in life that you're going to look for the solution and not assess the blame, it carries you a long way.
Love it. Make some noise, by the way. Okay. Last question.
What's next for you? What's going to happen to Michael Franzese, okay? What's next for you?
Well, aside from family, I mean, that's number one for me, God and family always. But, we're growing our wine company. Like I said, we're in our third year. Just wine. Armenian wines. Now we're in the water business. The guy did come to me with water from Italy. And he said, Michael, I need a distributor. You're doing good with the wine. I said, bring it on. He says, as long as you're branded my name, we'll do it. So we're in the water business now. Great water, by the way, from Italy. I have to have one Italian product, right? And then I'm also in the pizza business. And we have frozen pizza. We have 3 divisions. Well, we had 2 divisions, hopefully a 3rd division. I'm going to let a secret out now that I shouldn't be, but I'm going to do it anyhow. There's only, a couple hundred people here? You can all keep a secret, right? But we have pizza vending machines that we're placing now throughout the country. Yes. You're going to hold me to it, because I have a partner. We're together 40 years, and we're in the restaurant business together. And we sold our last restaurant. He came to me. I said, what do you want to do? He says, I want to go into the pizza business. I said, Tony, everybody in their probe is pizza. What are we going to do different, right? He said, well, let me show you. So he goes to Italy, spends several months there, comes back, and gets this great recipe for Roma-style pizza. I'm Italian. I know the pizza. So we go into the frozen pizza business. We just built a big kitchen in Henderson about it. We can put out 1 million slices a day. And now we're going into all the markets that I have my wine in. We're at all the big ones, Costco and all those, right? So we have the vending machines, we have the frozen pizza, and I need everybody that's a praying person to pray, because we're right at the 1-yard line with having our pizza in Starbucks. I'm listening to this. Now, if it doesn't happen, you could all say, well, it didn't happen, but I think we're there. We haven't got a total commitment. We're working on it 2 years. Corporate America is very slow with stuff, and they've had some changes with their CDO and everything else, but I think we're going to get it, and if we get it, it'll be great. We'll white label it. It'll be their pizza, but it'll be big for us. But I will tell you all this. It is absolutely the best frozen pizza you will ever eat, and it comes out of the machine like it came out of the oven. It's unbelievable. The machines are very high-tech, the AI-powered and all that stuff. So we're excited about it, and so I'm in the pizza and the wine business, and then we just continue. I love what we do on social media because I love the interaction with people, and it's building. And you know the story with Patrick, right? When he first interviewed me. Patrick Bet-David. I get a call from a guy in South America. And he says, this guy, Patrick Bet-David, this was back in 2018. And he says he wants to interview you. He's got a YouTube channel. I said, I don't do interviews on YouTube. He said, no, come on, he's a good guy and do it for me. I said, okay. So they come to my house, but Patrick's not there. And they set up all the cameras and everything. And I said, where's this guy? It's a Sunday, right? And he's like an hour and a half late. So Mario was there, and I said, Mario, pack your stuff and get out. This guy is not here, and I got to go. I got to leave, go someplace. Finally, Patrick shows up, right? And so we go inside. We meet. We talk outside. We go inside, and I've got my shoes off, and Patrick takes his shoes off, and we're sitting there. We do the interview, right? Well, it was a good interview. Patrick is great. Now, look, Patrick, we've become good friends since then, but when the interview comes out, everybody is harassing Patrick because they're saying, no, he kept his shoes on, I had mine off. He disrespected the mom guy, he didn't take his shoes off. Oh my God. Well, Patrick was catching a lot of flack on that, but it was a great interview. Patrick is terrific, and we became really dear friends since this.
I'm glad that you built a relationship as Dick, because we get hard over here as well. So, Next nos vemos con Michael Franzese.